welcome to the Skiffy and Fanny Show.
The more you tighten your grip, Tarkin, the more solar star systems will slip through your fingers.
Perfect.
All I can think is Dantooine is not a sufficient military target, so he must take out more sufficient targets.
Give us the name of the system!
We have no weapons. Alderaan, people on Alderaan are just nice. They just have cafes. Everything's kind. Cafes and bookstores, guys. And a lot of hair salons, because Princess Leia doesn't get her hair like that done anywhere else but Alderaan. Just saying. This is why she doesn't have the buns in the other movies, by the way.
That explains it.
Yeah, Alderaan's gone. She has no hairdresser, so you can do her hair like that anymore.
And she's not in the Senate anymore, so she can just wear a simple braid or whatever.
Yeah.
Action Leia.
Yeah, that is an interesting detail, Trish, that when you think about the prequels, right? Because there's a whole bit with Amidala, who is, of course, technically Leia's mom. Well, like biological mom, literally. But yeah, but of course, as queen of Naboo, right, they all have
temporary queen.
Temporary queen, right?
Elected queen.
Elected monarch, as it were. Right? They have this getup. They all wear these very elaborate getups with face paint and hair designs and all of this stuff. And it is like an interesting little touch that Leia also has aspects of that as royalty, that implies some consistency in the Star Wars universe, that royalty has very strange hairstyle choices.
I don't know.
Leisure class in general has more time for ornamentation.
That's true. But I mean, we can get into that when we talk about our topic in full.
That is true. Well, I'm Shaun.
We should introduce ourselves first, yes.
I'm Trish.
I'm eligibly Paul.
Are you eligible now?
Well, it is award nomination season, so I'm going to call myself, at least for the purposes of this podcast, eligible.
I assume when you say eligible...
New eligibility.
Yes, exactly.
Nominations are due literally right now, if I'm correct?
No, it's about
March
a week.
9, Saturday at 4 p.m. Glasgow time.
So, yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, this theoretically would go out before then, but who knows? Well, in any case...
the live streamers certainly will
the live streamers can see us and act.
So remember to make your Hugo nominations, especially in the fan categories.
Yes,
that includes
please do.
Fan cast and fan writers. And fanzines.
Fancast, fan writers, fanzines, all of the above. Please do. Well, okay, so on
fan
the
artists.
And fan artists.
Fan artists.
All the fan object people.
All the fan things.
So, a real quick thing for folks. This topic was a topic I came up with at the last minute, so we are in no way prepared, except that Paul and Trish have the collective knowledge of at least 10 star empires. And so I'm sure they'll have more examples than I came up with. And that topic is science fiction empires and the reasons why they fail. And I raised this topic. It came up because we needed one. And then the other reason was there were actually two panels. I don't know if they both ran, but there were two panels that were supposed to run at Capricorn. I cannot remember if they did. One was like ways to hold the star empire or an interstellar empire. And the other one was like how to lose one, basically. And I didn't actually get a chance to attend either of those because I had other things I had to do. So this made sense as a topic. Like, hey, science fiction empire. Science fiction's full of empires. They don't all last very long. Some of them go down in a flaming hellscape. And some of them quietly transition into other forms of government. And some of them, I guess they just stop calling themselves empires, but they're still empires. Question mark.
Well, let me ask you this. What makes an empire, Shaun?
What makes an empire an empire?
I know that's kind of a 101 question, but it's an important 101 question.
It's not really a 101 question because the concept of an empire has a wide variety of potential definitions depending on what you are applying it to. If you mean empire is in imperialistic systems, then you're talking things like the British Empire, the French Empire, to lesser degree, the Spanish Empire, which is primarily a monarchy. But if you mean any kind of overarching political structure that is not strictly monarchical and involves the acquisition and management of territories from a metropole abroad, then, yeah, again, we get the British, we get the French, we get the Dutch, we get the Spanish, and then you also get all kinds of empires going back to ancient antiquity and before.
Yeah, which is more my interest. The
Oh, do you
Byzantine, the
count?
Persian.
Do you
Go ahead.
count economic and cultural hegemonies? It's been argued whether the United States is an empire or it's definitely a hegemony at the very least. Does
So
that count in
yes.
this discussion?
So part of what you're describing is cultural imperialism, which
Mhm.
some of the arguments people make against the United States ever being considered an empire, and I will tell you why that's actually wrong in a second. But one of the main arguments is, well, the United States isn't in the kind of acquisition game the same way that the other empires, like the British Empire, are, where there's formal governments they've sent people to manage these colonies. They're explicitly colonies being managed by an overarching government structure, and so all these places become under the purview of whatever the empire happens to be. Like the British Empire is like the most obvious example, because the number of nations they end up controlling with their self-imposed colonial governments in charge of them, right, kind of establish what we think of as the quintessential modern empire. Paul might speak to Rome in a different way, because Rome also has an empire, but it's maybe slightly different in some respects. But the United States also has those. It has just played a very clever game of calling them something else. So the big example I give you is actually the Philippines. After the Spanish-American War, the United States took possession of the Philippines. And I don't use that word lightly. That's literally that, like, a part of the concession the Spanish made was they handed over their colony, the Philippines, and the United States took over governance of it in almost exactly the same way that the British Empire and the other main empires were managing it, which is why the United States has been an empire and now is a little bit differently thought of as being more of a cultural empire or a cultural imperialist state, because of the influence we have through economic measures and cultural influence. So the idea
And
that
I'll
we're
note
not...
that Hawaii didn't exactly ask to be taken over and have its leader basically jailed in the palace
Deposed.
for years.
Although that was not
Yeah.
strictly approved at the time by the U.S. government.
No, but
They
the U.S. certainly took advantage of that.
They did
And,
after the fact. They very much
they
went,
did after
well,
the
it's
fact.
happened.
It
Like,
happened.
Yeah. That's a very reductive.
Or even right now. I mean, there's still places
Yeah.
there's still territories that strangely you're not quite a citizen if you were born there that the U.S. owns, like parts of the Solomon Islands, which is very weird to me.
Yeah.
That it's like you're not a U.S. citizen technically. It's like, how does that
Right,
work?
and even people who are U.S. citizens, like Puerto Ricans, aren't allowed to have full representation. So
Unless they
Right.
move to the States, yes.
If they come to the U.S., they're considered full citizens inside the United States. So any place they're a resident of in the continental or Hawaii, United States. Right. But yeah, as Trish correctly points out, in their home territory, which is a U.S. territory, they don't have those rights. And that is true of a number of islands island nations that the U.S. has as territories. The people there may be able to be American citizens, but they don't get any of the privileges of American citizenship at home, which again is why I say that the United States is very good at just calling things something other than colonies, so we can't say that they were at one point a colonial state. If you call it something else, maybe people won't notice that a penguin is a penguin. Yeah. Or if you're Benedict Cumberbatch, you can't even say penguin. You just say penguin.
Well, that's Benedict Cumberbatch can say lots of things.
That's true. But yeah, so when we talk empires, like in science fiction, like the most famous ones are... There's really not a lot of depth really shown in those. Like the examples that we can think of immediately are like things like the Empire in Star Wars, which is literally just called the Galactic Empire. Or looking at like Flash Gordon, which has a sort of empire of its own, or even to some degree some of the cultures that exist within Star Trek, at times perhaps more nuanced than you see in Star Wars. But the Klingon Empire, for example, which has a very imperialistic structure, reminiscent of many of the empires we would have seen on the United in this world. And our
Also
own
the Romulans. Romulan Star Empire.
Yeah. So like there may not be always terribly nuanced, because the interest is maybe not in dealing with the deeper cultural influences of empire in a lot of science fiction, although there are exceptions to that.
Can I talk about Dune now?
Okay, Fine, Paul.
I know
wait,
you
the
don't.
new movie Dune?
I know. Well, I'm just talking about Dune in general, both the books and, of course, the second movie is coming soon.
Please.
But Dune is interesting in that it's they say straight up that the Empire is unstable. The phrase "the most unstable of structures." So it's an empire, and I guess I'm going a little early on the topic. Empire that's ready to be shoved over, given enough large external force, and that external force turns out to be Paul and the Fremen. It's an empire that's been going for 10,000 years, but it's an empire that's just ready to go. Just needs an external factor to spiral into something else, and it's a fascinating study of what kind. Because the power centers. I mean, in Star Wars, we get a sense that we have the Emperor, and then you have these governors and the Death Star, but now a real sense of competing powers. Whereas in Dune, we have, I'm talking the books as much more than the movie, we have the Emperor, yes, but we have these houses scheming. We have all sorts of weird plots involving recreations of people and the forbidden delving back into mechanisms, and of course the Bene Gesserit, who have been breeding people for thousands of years to a purpose. So it shows how empires can have multiple centers of competing power underneath the metropole, and how those can kind of jockey and jostle to carve out a little more space over themselves, or even just between factions. Like, for example, Baron Harkonnen desires to become a duke, and the person he could become a duke by deposing is, of course, Duke Leto Atreides. And it's like, so he architects this massive campaign to become a duke by bringing the Atreides down. In the meantime, the Emperor's afraid that Atreides could supplant him as a popular member of the Lancerod, powerful army. So it's fascinating that one fish goes after the other while another fish is worried about that same fish. I find that interest much more interesting than monopoles. You have an emperor and that's all that is, because that's not how empires really work.
No.
I mean, you can have one central person, but that person's commands are transmitted and put through a horde of people below him or her. And those people interpret those commands to their own benefit, even if they're not consciously doing so. And you wind up with all sorts of interesting, and to use the word in the adjacent, Byzantine politics. I love Byzantine politics. I mean, there are authors who say you love the schemy Byzantine politics. I say yes, I do.
Well, yeah, you can also have Byzantine politics in democracies, of course, with many centers of power. But there's something about an empire that it highlights those power dynamics. I think a little more than democracies do. From a writer's perspective, I think empires are probably just easier to write about, probably, than democracies. You have your basic feudal family stuff, and most people grew up reading stuff about that and know how to write about stuff like that. It's a lot more complicated to write about legislative and corporate maneuvering, although some have done it.
Martha Wells' Murderbot is a corporate future where corporate...
Right, or I was thinking of Charlie Strauss's Merchant Princes books. And one of his previous book talked about slow money and fast money, and how you're going to have differing degrees of control and communication when you don't have FTL communications, let alone FTL travel. And so, in a way, the perceived stability of an empire allows a large or an imperial family on top, makes it easier to have a far-flung network of planets or whatever. You have the continuity, the dynastic continuity. But as we've seen, Imperial China lasted a long, long time, but there were several dramatic changes of dynasty over China in that time, including, an entirely different group of people, the Mongols coming in and taking over the whole system.
Yeah, and periods where the center did not hold, and you wound up the warring states or the various spring and autumn periods, and the other periods where you had fractured Chinese states, but that over time a determined state decided, no, we're going to rebuild China again. We're going to rebuild the empire, which is a fascinating thing that didn't happen with the Roman Empire as much as they wanted it to. I mean, the Byzantines tried to give it a go. If that didn't work so well. The Holy Roman Empire really didn't work. Alexander's empire fell apart and never came back again. But the Chinese Empire, despite everything, kept coming back together again all the way till its finally its transformation to a republic in the early 20th century. And that's very different than every other empire that's seen rises and falls, trying to like that. We're going to do this empire thing again. We do it better, differently. And as you were saying, there's a I mean, the Tang dynasty is not the same as the Sui dynasty. It's not the same as the Yuan dynasty or the Qing or the Ming. They're all different, but they're all empires of China. And it's like a rebooting, reimagination, reinvention of empire every time. And I don't see that much in science fiction. The only thing I can think of that comes close is the Traveler universe, where you start off with the Bellani Star Empire, then they spread out and they find this little world called Earth, and sadly and tragically for the Bellani, the Earth knocks off the Bellani Empire, sets up an empire that falls, get Dark Age, and then they set up a third Imperium. And they're all different polities. If you play the game in those different time periods, you can get very different kinds of games, even more different than just in a single traveling empire. And that's the only science fiction property I can think of where empires rise and fall. I can give you a better example. What's your better example?
EVE Online.
I've never played EVE Online, so tell me more.
You don't need to play it. There's actually 2 history books now. That are
okay, tell me about it then.
So EVE Online's internal universe has 2 areas. One is like a computer-controlled area that's basically like a safe zone. You really can't do whatever you want there. It's controlled by like a computer alliance, right? And everything else, all the other territories, the finite regions that exist, are all controlled by players. And since EVE Online has existed, those players have vied over control of those territories and have managed all different types of governmental structures, including numerous shifts, not only of who controls certain territories, but even like the way those territories, when they're controlled and the power dynamics shift, how those government structures operate. So you actually have within EVE Online people in real life playing on a game, an evil space dictator engaged in propaganda. And then you have coalitions that emerge and create new empires, and then those change their governmental structure over time because they find something else that's more effective. So EVE Online is happening in real time all the time, and you can actually watch empires collapse for all kinds of reasons.
I kind of heard a little bit about like empires rising and falling, but I've never actually
it's amazing,
gone
Paul.
into it.
But Andrew Groen, I believe it's Groen, has written 2 history books about the wars of EVE Online. It is utterly fascinating, and it's the only game I can think of that does this. No other game has such elaborate internal politics that are people-driven.
Rather than like AIs, because I'm thinking Stellaris, but Stellaris generally is a one-player game, and you can get some dynamics going on.
Right, well, but you won't get that like randomness.
But you won't get that randomness of people just like go Leroy Jenkins across the galaxy and causing all sorts of chaos.
You don't get heroes. They're literal heroes in EVE Online. People who have waged guerrilla war against online space empires and essentially won as a consequence of their guerrilla warfare. Like they're like apocryphal stories of battles that were never recorded, where we know what was lost, but we don't know how it happened, that become legends in EVE Online. It's wild. So as a science fiction universe, it's probably the best example of this, but it's also kind of cheating because actual people are playing this. They're spending months and months and years of their lives dedicated to these strange political structures that they've decided to dedicate themselves to. I mean, people even engage in espionage on EVE Online. It's kind of amazing.
Well, Warhammer 40K,
There you
that
go.
is conceived as a ruling imperium also. I haven't played it myself, but of course, a lot of people do.
Well, and that
But,
one's meant to be a satire.
I don't know if they really deal with that at all on the upper levels, or I think most of the campaigns are set at a bit lower level than actually scheming for the throne or anything.
Yeah, and some of the written fiction, you might deal with some of these things.
Mhm.
David Annandale would probably be the person to ask. The thing with like Warhammer 40K though is like it's meant as satire. It's not meant, it's sort of unlike some of our other examples where it's very serious. Like Warhammer 40K, like intentionally takes the set dressing of the British Empire and isn't at any point saying like this is actually good. We're just playing around, right? Although 40K players apparently got mad at one point because, like, I guess they were surprised that it wasn't a real empire? ? Yeah. So, but so a lot of this raises like the question of why did they fail? Because so many science fiction stories, especially our most popular ones, are about precisely this, right? An empire falls somehow. And it kind of earlier in our conversation, I think both Paul and Trish, some of the suggestions I kind of took from what you were saying were that there seemed to be like three types of three types of things that cause empires to fall. There's like the external threat, something from outside takes it out, right? So like the Mongolian Empire comes in, right, in the real world and takes over, as it were. And so the old empire's gone because it's been taken over. The other option might be threats from within, but there are two kinds of threats from within, which is the threat from like the political structure itself, which would be more like Dune up to till the Fremen kind of get involved, right? Which is people backstabbing and trying to take over, etc.
Right,
and
just
then,
dynastic clashes, but not necessarily changing the system.
Right, dynastic clashes, which maybe don't change the system in its largest context, but might change small components of it because different leaders are weird. And then the other option would be like the threat from within that's like revolution, basically, which would be like the Star Wars example. The rebellion are almost entirely people from inside the empire who are fighting.
The French Revolution as an example.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's another kind of threat from within, which is that aggressive empires tend to expand beyond their ability to control or administer what they have taken. So they end up spreading themselves too thin, and can just tend to, I think that is definitely part of what happened with the Roman Empire. They kind of lost focus, there were a lot of reasons why the Roman Empire fell. But you tend to have them, just expand, and eventually, your supply lines, your lines of communication, everything gets thinner and thinner. And then often you start to get rot from within as well.
Well, you're actually raising a great point, because I hadn't really thought like in the real world, how does it really work in the real world? But you're absolutely right, Trish. I mean, it may not be just that one thing involved. It may be multifactorial, but when you look at the British Empire, for example, they, around the mid to late 1800s, right around the turn of the century, they're having very serious conversations among colonial administrators on whether or not to keep a lot of their Caribbean colonies, because some of them cost more to maintain than they produce for the empire. And they now have India, and India is way more productive and is pulling more stuff. Do we really need to keep some of these colonies? So there's arguments of like, well, we could just let it go. Like, not to quote a movie, don't nobody do that. But you're not wrong, right? Because you can't expand forever on a finite space like the Earth, right? Eventually, you can't acquire anything else, or the acquisitions become less fruitful. And if you need constant growth in an empire that's fundamentally capitalistic, right, it just collapses eventually. It has to relinquish control. Obviously, the British Empire also had revolution, it had fights, it had people threatening to fight them. The British Empire knew those threats were very real and basically gave up some colonies by way of its Commonwealth model as a result of that, because they watched like the French fighting guerrilla warfare in like northern Africa.
Algeria, yeah.
The Battle of Algiers, which is now a famous movie if you've ever watched it, has one of the people who was there, by the way, in the movie. He's an actor in it.
Huh.
Fun fact. Yeah. So that kind of thing is these are the empires don't just fall because of like one thing. It's always many factors eventually lead to it. Maybe one thing accelerates it, but it's always many things. Like even the Roman Empire, like it's not just one thing that took the Roman Empire down. I love the thing of like, for the longest time I used to believe that, oh well, they just ran out of wood. It's like that was the reason they collapsed. And I was like, someone told me that once in school, and I was like, okay, sure.
Wow.
Well, I'm going to bring up Gibbon now because I love to bring up Gibbon. Because
you mean the monkeys?
No, Edward Gibbon.
The monkeys, right? The monkeys did the monkeys take down an empire?
No, I'm talking about the 18th century.
They did in Word for World is Forest.
They did.
Well, they didn't take it all down. They just took down a colony, but still.
But Le Guin had fun with that. But that's an anti-colonialist narrative, not an anti-empire technically, but maybe. But anyway, so Gibbon, who's hard to read, large to read, had an axe to grind, and he came up with the idea that basically the Roman Empire fell because of quote unquote decadence. And that was the narrative that lasted well for most education well into modern times. And as far as that's the narrative of this, the Romans turned decadent and that's why they fell, and so the barbarians then could conquer them and start the cycle anew. And it's kind of the complexities of why Rome fell are still debated. It's like, and okay, now I'm going to plug an acquaintance of mine. I'm not quite sure he's a friend yet. But he's an historian named David Perry. He wrote a book with a colleague called Matt Gabriel, who talks about the fall of Rome and the quote unquote Dark Ages, and how they feel the term Dark Ages is really bullshit, and that Rome didn't fall, it was quote unquote transformed. I won't quite go that far, because if you're going from a polity that can send goods across half the world to very localized systems of power and production, that to me is kind of, yeah, your empire fell. I mean, yes, people were still living there. It's not fell, it's like it turned into a complete wasteland. People still doing things and building things and continuing on. It's just that we don't have a lot of records for several centuries, because life was so hand to mouth that you didn't have a large corpus of people writing about things. I mean, we have a lot of stuff from the Roman Empire because they wrote down everything, man. I went to a museum in Rome that just had endless amounts of tablets and things from the Roman Empire, and that's just a tiny fraction of what they must have written, that we have so many left over. Whereas in the Dark Ages, we've got some chronicles and monasteries, and that's about it, except for a few historians. And that's why it's a Dark Ages, because lots of places were just not documenting things, because when life is worrying that a warlord's going to come along and steal your farm, you're not going to sit there at night writing about your day. You probably didn't even learn to write anymore. So
I like this idea of rethinking of the Dark Ages as not the argument that people make where like people weren't sophisticated and like everyone was stupid, but rather it's that not enough information was kept from this period, And so we're actually in the dark. We're the ones in the dark.
So
we lack
the name
knowledge.
of the book. Yeah, so the name of the book for listeners is The Bright Ages by David Perry and Matthew Gabrielle. Go ahead and read it. I liked it a lot. It gave me a new perspective on stuff I thought I knew. And it kind of has pushed me a little bit off of the dogmatic, Rome fell and this was the end of the world sort of thing, into something more nuanced. So,
but Paul,
David
you
and
were
Matt
there.
Definitely got me. Yes. No, actually, I wasn't there at the time. By that time, I was bumming around.
What, in Greenland? Was that when you were in your monk phase?
No. This was when it was in my Buddhist phase, and I was in a monastery in North India.
I rest my case. In your monk phase.
Yes.
You were a Buddhist monk.
I was in my monk phase. So I was in my monk phase.
Did you say Ontario?
No, North India.
Oh, sorry. I heard Ontario in my head, and I was just like, Paul, as Buddhist monk, went to a country that didn't exist, a state, a province that didn't exist.
That only would work in a game of Civilization 7, which is a game about building empires. And going back to our earlier thing, everything's called an empire in that. Like the blank empire joins the stage, including the American Empire. It's called the American Empire when you play them. So, you know? I mean,
when you look at the history of the United States immediately when it forms, like its very first actions for a century are all colonial acquisitions. We just, again, the United States loves to change how we talk about things, right? So like westward expansion, the United States starts getting
destiny.
Yes, manifest destiny instead of, colonial acquisition and mass genocide. Which definitely don't sound as nice. And you can understand if you look at that period, manifest destiny does sound like it is a very good buzzword. It really does convey this sense of greatness and necessity, like that we must do this. It is our destiny, right? It's like Darth Vader coming out and being like, "It is your manifest destiny, Luke. I am your father." But like when you look at, so normally that gets reduced in science fiction down to just like the most basest variation of it, which is just we need to take the thing, like it is our thing. We're going to take the thing. And that's like the level of thought to it, which I think is important in science fiction when we're just trying to make a point that empire bad, because a lot of science fiction isn't really interested in like, let's interrogate this. But it does sometimes feel that like it's a little too simplistic, that sometimes the motivations for people who run colonial empires are their motivations aren't as simple as just I am bad. I'm just here to steal. Right, they have beliefs that we obviously disagree with, but we need to see those interrogated. And you do get them to some degree in probably fantasy in some ways, a lot more than science fiction, at least more until maybe the last 30 years. In science fiction, we get a lot more of it now, but
more recent fantasy. I mean, the start of Tolkien fantasy going through Brooks and going into the 80s. By and large, fantasy empires were not really interrogated. Like generally the empire was either a positive thing that you're in or a negative evil empire from some dread realm that you have to fight, and there's no nuance as to what those empires mean and do. It's only till we get to like the 90s and you start getting novels by people like say Kate Elliott, where you start getting empires and kingdoms that are multi-sided and complex, and
yeah, you're right.
Aliens who come in from the north and they have their own ups and downs and positives and negatives. And so, but it's really accelerated in the last 20 years where we get empires, both science fictional and fantasy, which are the mixed bags that any empire is at any time in history, which is a delightful thing to me because, we get to interrogate and look at empires. What are they good for? Absolutely nothing? Question mark? Yes, no?
Paul, come on.
I'm sorry, I could not resist.
Empires, what are they good for? Absolutely nothing. Sing it again, y'all.
Just on the lines of complex empires, I think that the Radich Empire in Lecky's Ancillary Justice and sequels is pretty unequivocally bad. They conquer people and force them to turn over part of their population to become mind slaves, to have their brains emptied out and replaced with other stuff. That's a bad empire. Much more complex is Arkady Martin's A Memory Called Empire, the Tish Kalan Empire.
I can never pronounce it.
I think that's on the level of what it's supposed to sound like. But it's the protagonist in the first book is someone who's always been fascinated. She's lived on a place on the fringes that is nominally independent and trying to stay that way, but she's always been fascinated by the culture, the poetry, the literature, the everything, and finally gets to go as a representative to the center of this empire. And, it turns out that there's a lot going on, and some people in it are really trying hard to be good. And, some of it, they can use their power, and some of it, they have to make bad choices because sometimes, dealing with other people, you have to make compromises. So I think that's a really good example of some of the complexities of Empire. For other good empires, of course, in Lois Master Buchel's Vorkosiverse, the Baryaran Empire is good, but they've had some really, really bad leaders before the President Nice Emperor Gregor. And but they don't really get into what you see in another series, which is David Weber's
Honor Harrington
Honorverse. There, Honor Harrington serves the Star Empire of Manticore, which is ruled by.
Is it Star Empire or Star Republic?
It varies.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There's so many books I bounce between the different names. Yeah.
Right.
Depends on the day of the week and how they're feeling.
Right. There is basically the Star Kingdom, call it what you will, of Manticore, which has a good ruler, and their main opponent through many of the books is Haven, which starts out as an oligarchy, later goes through basically a French Revolution. Weber heavily patterns Haven on the French Revolution. And so Haven is a very expansionist polity. It survives by basically taking over new worlds and stripping them, so it always needs to survive. And they are able to get a lot of good press and allies at the first part of this war because, they are a good democracy fighting an evil monarchy. Well, it is a monarchy, but it's not evil. So there's that complexity. And then later on, the Solarian League, which is Earth and, a huge number of planets, gets involved also, and they are also nominally a democracy, but a very oppressive, heavy-handed one. So I think Weber is making some good points and asking some good questions there, even if I certainly don't agree with all of the conclusions that are drawn.
Yeah. Yeah, and interesting you bring up some of those because it made me think of Tobias Bickel's Xenowealth Saga, which is interesting because its perspective on things shifts. So the beginning is, and I don't know that Bickel is aware of this, but he basically has the same idea that's in the Star Wars universe, but just without clones with extra vowels in their names, which is that in Star Wars, if you read the original, what they call Legends now, it turns out that the Emperor, why he is so interested in making the Empire a thing, part of it's because he's a xenophobic, racist, super Nazi, but the other part of it is that he is under the belief that there is another power that is, like, he comes under the belief that there's another power that actually exists that is going to come and basically wipe everyone out unless the galaxy is united under a singular banner. Now, his solution to that is not what I would do, which is like maybe get evidence that this thing exists and then warn everybody and then be like, hey, maybe we should be friends and like we should work together because, common threat, we can kind of get over our bullshit. So he goes with Empire. But in the Xenowealth, it's the same thing, except it's also very true. And the Satrapy, who are the like horseshoe crab giant alien overlords in the first book, in Ragamuffin, they actually know these threats exist, and they believe that the only reason those threats won't invade this part of space is because they have maintained control and order. And to some degree, they're technically correct, because when their empire is destroyed by rebellion from within, by primarily Caribbean peoples supporting the rebellion and essentially destroying their ability to shut down wormholes and close people off, thus preventing them from canceling infection anywhere in the system. What they find is eventually they meet beings from outside that are actually a greater threat. And the different human, either the Xenowealth, which is about the new republic that's built on humans and aliens working together, even aliens who previously had enslaved humans, they find common cause. And then there is the Human League, which is like basically the humans who become xenophobic to the point where all aliens they're not allowed in human space, they will be killed. And that conflict has made it so the whole region is actually weak now. It cannot repel these invaders because it doesn't have the collective power. So the end of the series is basically dealing with that power vacuum and the realization that we can't afford to be xenophobic. It never gets quite to the proper conclusion, but it leads us to that point, which I really like because it actually takes us away from the ways that humans are capable of these horrific, xenophobic, violent acts against us and people like us, to possibly finding some solution to that problem of wanting to consolidate power in a way that is harmful. Yeah, cooperation, which is...
I'm thinking of Walter John Williams' Dread Empire series.
Okay.
Which starts with a dying race which has had this big star empire, including Earth, for quite some time, and the last member of that race dies off. Now what happens? It turns out to be a scramble for power as humans and other aliens try to figure out what are we going to do in the ashes of the people that have oppressed us so long to actually try to build something new. I mean, some of the aliens want to just like, okay, we'll be the top dogs of the aliens, and other humans and aliens are like very much against that program and want to find different paths. And he's gotten a whole bunch of novels out of this universe, ranging from intrigue to big on space battles. So you can do lots of different things.
It kind of gets to the idea that when you live under these systems, the idea that you can take that system down and then the thing you build up next is going to be some utopian perfect thing. Well, no. The system you've known this whole time is an empire with all of its flaws and problems. And so that is your framework from which you're building everything. So there's actually a need to talk about this on a progressive level. That is, every government we're creating, we should be trying to make something better and better and better and better. But that's really hard to do with people that are fundamentally broken by hegemony.
Let's bring up the French Revolution.
The French never did anything incorrect when they did their revolution.
The
decisions they have made the entire time have been 100% accurate, Paul.
Shaun.
Of course not. Okay. Guys, calm down. I can already see the cancel
we go from
emails.
Ancien regime to an attempt at a republic to the republic eating its own children until finally we get Napoleon Bonaparte saying, well, we'll just try to start a whole new empire with me on top, and making a pretty go of it. And the interesting is, no, Napoleon espoused the ideals of the revolution. He was consciously in appearance and in deed trying to basically go through the whole empire project. There's a room in a museum in Montreal which is nothing but depictions of Napoleon. A lot of them are imperialistic. You see Napoleon in these fine emperor robes. You see Napoleon with this Caesar crown, laurel bust on his head and all this other stuff. And so it's like he didn't learn. He lived through the revolution and decided, nope, I'm just gonna restart the whole thing again and learn from nothing. And I mean, he was trying to put siblings on thrones of Europe. I mean, he basically decided, nope, we're going to start the whole imperial project. And what happens? They finally knock him off. We get a monarchy, then a republic, then another monarchy, which was Napoleon III. And it's like, I'm now reminded of the Bourbons, Bourbons in this whole because the Bourbons were the royal family that got knocked off in 1789 and held power after Napoleon was defeated and then held again and again. The Bourbons forget nothing and remember and learn nothing, and that's sad. That's a sad testament as to not trying to build better, just trying to we're just gonna try this a slightly different way this time. And so, as you were saying, Shaun, without evolution, you're just trapped in
repetition.
Repetition and fighting the same old battles and getting
Steven
nowhere.
In chat says, and there are no fewer than 3 competing lines of French pretenders to this day, and they all hate each other, and it's hilarious.
I didn't know that, but I am not surprised.
That's very amusing.
So not surprised. I mean, royal families and stuff wind up with all sorts of weird people in their family trees. I mean, you've both seen King Ralph, right?
Seen what?
King Ralph, the movie.
No, I
No.
didn't.
Okay, King Ralph is a comedy, stars John Goodman, where an accident electrocutes most of the royal family of England. So the heir to the throne turns out to be this nobody American, played by John Goodman. Hilarity does ensue.
That's fun. That's fun.
It is lots of fun.
Stephen in chat also wants to point out that Le Guin is an exception that proves the rule. She was an anti-imperialist before it was cool. And I do want to note that I did misspeak earlier that you get a lot of anti-imperialist writing, especially in the 60s and 70s, as part of the new wave. And technically, science fiction has been occasionally always against empires. It sometimes uses empire very loosely in earlier science fiction, where sometimes they're actually empires and then they're thought as good. Sometimes they're not empires and they're thought as good. And sometimes they're like deliberately, the empire is not good and this isn't a thing we want. But I think there's a critical mass that hits probably the 60s and 70s where you get more of that. But I'm curious what others think. Certainly we're more critical now than we would have been 30 or 40 years ago in terms of the general census of science fiction, but I don't know.
Right, a lot of Golden Age writers were uncritically pro-empire, or at least assuming that empire would be the way things go. Poul Anderson's Dominic Flandry stories, even though in that the empire is kind of collapsing under its own weight. Isaac Asimov's Foundation, the classic empire. You have a fall, just like Rome, and people trying to stop the Dark Ages by laying the groundwork for another empire, which they all just kind of seem to assume will be a good thing and a good way to run things afterward. And
he's a psychohistorian, Trish. He's done all the math.
Well, he had a nice template to follow with the Roman Empire. Paul already mentioned Dune. Current examples include Scalzi's The Collapsing Empire, again, a falling empire, and The Last Emperox. I think the main problem was that the wormholes were closing up and people were trying to figure out how to deal with that. You also have a lot more stories these days that don't have empires. Ian Banks's The Culture series. You have a lot of anti-imperialist media science fiction. Sorry. The Star Trek is it has empires in it, but it is, a cooperative democracy type culture.
Yeah, and the empires are never viewed as, maybe sometimes we have to work with an empire, but it is not the society that we want.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So speaking of empires, how imperial is the Federation?
Well, it depends on which timeline we're in.
Mm.
And I wasn't just thinking when they go to the mirror universe and they meet evil versions of themselves. I'm also thinking the timeline from the relatively newer movies, right? Which has people in power who I'm not sure a cooperative democratic structure like that imagined in TNG would make it that easy for someone to acquire that much militaristic power so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So there seems to be a sense in the film versions that higher level members of the Federation have a very, very long leash that perhaps implies soft empire, but not necessarily explicit empire. And I'm using soft very softly.
Right, you're using soft very, very mildly, yes.
In chat, Steven says, the hegemonic and culturally imperialistic aspects of the Federation have been occasionally commented on by the alien characters on several occasions over Star Trek's existence.
Yes, that's what I was thinking of it. That's why I was
the Bajorans have a lot to say on that subject, for example.
Poor Bajor being batted around between Cardassia and the Federation and trying to find their own path and all that. Or the worlds in that neutral zone between the Cardassia and the Federation being forced to choose which side to go on and not always choosing the one you thought. And of course, the Ferengi have strong opinions about the Federation's entire project.
Well, I'm not going to listen to them on much.
And, but then you have the Romulans who kind of just see the Federation as just another empire, just not, actually admitting it, which is a very devious Romulan sort of approach. Whereas the Klingons don't quite know what to do with the Federation. They just can't be conquered, but they're not an empire either. But they're still currently a problem. With a capital P for the.
You obviously have oh my god, the name of the fringe rebel group that's all up in Voyager, and
the
Maquis, yeah, who definitely don't think of the Federation as being strictly non-imperial.
Oh yeah,
I think the problem with the Federation is it is hard to view them as a true empire. Largely on the grounds that the way the Federation works is generally by free association, as long as you agree to its internal rules. And if you don't, then you can still work with the Federation. You just won't get the added benefits of being part of the Federation. So they have economic relationships with peoples who are completely separated from the Federation, but they don't necessarily grant them the same privileges of membership. But those people are welcome to join more or less at any time as long as they follow those rules. I don't see that as strictly imperialistic. It may be culturally imperialistic, which is what the Klingons in Discovery accuse them of, because the idea that if you join the Federation, Klingons will have to lose their cultural identity because they'll have to change. And to some degree, I think they're technically correct. But that's not the kind of same thing we mean when we talk about the power relationship of an empire, which has colonies that are created by installing governments on top of existing governments, right? When they say colonies, most of the time in Star Trek, what they mean is settlements on theoretically uninhabited worlds, which is not the same thing as what an empire means by a colony.
I'm thinking of something that I can't discuss because it was in an arc that I read, but it addressed this specific point of what do you call a settlement to avoid certain language. But I can't discuss it. Sorry.
Well, but this is actually a problem because people have called things that are what we think of as imperial or colonial institutions, right? They'll call them settlements to ignore the fact that, yeah, and this is kind of why I wish we did use different words when we're talking about uninhabited spaces as being places where we put people who are building places to live. We need another word, and I don't know what that word is because there is a baggage that is attached to settlement in particular. So, anyway, there's I'm sure 1,000 other things we could say. I don't know. We want to do you have any last thoughts, or do you want to start wrapping up?
Let me see what else I have notes on here.
Oh boy, Paul has 17 pages of notes.
No. Trish and I just had this note thing. If we have a.
Why am I even here? I should just just disappear and let you guys talk. You guys have your own note system. What's going on?
Sorry.
No, you're not.
We like
You're not sorry,
to prepare. Paul. Actually, I had mostly in my brain. And then Trish said, "Hey, here's some notes. Work with me on this." And I said, "Sure," because Trish is smart, so I don't forget anything.
Really interesting examples from
a recent example of a book I read that discusses empire is Bethany Jacobs' These Burning Stars, which is a theocratic empire, which is something we could talk another half hour about.
True.
And how a clerical agent for that empire kind of engineers her own destruction at the hands of someone she basically pushes towards being a rebel. And I don't want to give away some secrets because there's some very spoilery things I can talk about this book.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting to see, the marriage of political power with theocratic power, which you don't see a lot of nuance. You hear about theocratic empires and here and there have been theocratic empires in world history, but the nuance of how a theocratic empire differs from a political one and where the intersection of temporal and spiritual power arise. I mean, in some ways, what Paul Atreides does in Dune is basically create a theocratic state on the ruins of the empire. Because I think there's a line about when politics and religion ride in the same cart, trouble follows, and it's true. When you marry the temporal and spiritual, you can get all sorts of dark and twisted things coming out of an empire. I'm trying to think of positive depictions of theocratic empires, and I'm not coming up with any because it's just if power corrupts and you take two types of power, that corrupts absolutely.
Yeah, I think the problem that a theocratic empire represents is it is going to have even less space for difference within the subjects under its power, precisely because conformity to the religion becomes part of what the empire pushes in its day-to-day operations. That's why theocracies are kind of terrifying if you aren't a member of that group, because you are going to be forced to conform or bad things will happen to you. And a theocratic empire just does that at scale. And that's terrifying. I mean, I think science fiction likes to play around with people in charge who are essentially god-like beings. They may not literally be gods, but they have become godlike, who dispense their sense of what the world should look like onto others. But they tend to fall because they incite violence against them. People don't want to follow them forever. Once you're different, you have no choice but to conform, die, or fight, which could also mean dying.
But no empire lasts forever. And that gets me to a pet peeve. And I mentioned this on a podcast that will come out a couple weeks from now, where on World Building for Masochists, Marshall, Ryan Maresca, Cass Morris, and Tanya Barron, and they got me talking about world building. And they were asking about pet peeves, and one of them I brought up is you have the eternal empire or civilization that lasts for thousands of years without any change, and I'm thinking, oh God, no, please, this is what I hate in fantasy and science fiction. No, it's bad and wrong. Every political system changes over time, even empires. I mean, take the Byzantine Empire, one of my favorites. In the 6th century, on the Justinian, is a very different beast than the 9th century, where it's desperately fighting for its life, or the 11th century of its brief rebirth, or the 12th century when when basically a crusade knocked it off, or the pitiful last city-state that the Ottomans took off. Those are very different empires with very different kinds of emperors. There are some continuities, treachery, violence, political upheaval, but culturally, I mean, just following the religious history of the Byzantine Empire, how it kept trying to adapt and figure out what we're going to do with Christianity is itself a whole different strain that you could explore alone in its 9 centuries of history. So yes, no political entity, including empire, lasts thousands of years without significant change. That's not how it works. That's not how any of that works.
Yeah. Trish, you want to jump in?
Yeah, just another example or two of science fiction with empires. I was thinking of Robert Jackson Bennett's City of Stairs.
Oh, yes. Oh, God, I'm glad you brought this one up.
There used to be a theocratic empire with a lot of different gods, but basically it had spread over and taken colonies and everything. And one of those colonies finally fought back so successfully, partly by targeting and killing those gods, that it eventually became the ruler of the original city-state. And so you have very, very interesting colonial, anti-colonial dynamics in that book and in the books that followed. There was something else. I was silent for a long time because my furnace had kicked on when it was very noisy. But there was another series I was thinking of, and now it has slipped my grasp.
That's okay.
So,
well, yeah, I was trying to think of other examples that just weren't obvious examples too. And the Jinbot of Shantiport is one that has an empire in it. Which,
but kind of off, like in the distance. We're kind of like we're in this crapsack sort of backwater world, but there's remnants of former empire and
yes, the city of Shantiport is a palimpsest. It's
that's a great word. Yes,
yeah, built on top of each other, and you get those elements that kind of appear through the story as you see bits of what has been layered underneath. It's very cool.
Yes. Samit Basu does a great job in evoking, and then they mention like these forms, and he does it right, like showing like how society has changed over these thousands of years, up and down, in all sorts of different ways. And now what do we have? We have this kind of crapsack world, but the main characters find basically a djinn for all intents and purposes. And yes, folks, if you didn't know already, the Jinbot of Shantiport is an Aladdin story, but it takes it in really interesting directions. Yeah. And they do kind of engage with what we're going to do with politics and the complexities of that. And it's a really wonderful novel. And it's kind of jostling right now on my Hugo ballot with other worthy items.
Oh, it's on mine. It's on mine. I don't read as much as you, Paul, because I can't. I might die.
I've got way too many books. Like, this is good, and this is good, and this is good. Now I have 8 books and 6 slides. What do I do?
Paul, I need Paul to start a book club with me where we just read the same book so that I could try to keep up with him. Like, because I don't read enough. The other one that's probably very popular, but I think is important, is The Expanse. Right, by James S.A. Corey, in part because empires have existed previously in this universe. They arguably do exist in the beginnings and during, and then they emerge when the belt sort of collects together and builds their own free army, as it were, free navy, and engages in imperialistic activities under the guise that it is doing so to right wrongs that have been done to them, because they have been, are perhaps arguably under the boot of an imperialist system. Although I don't know that I would say Earth or Mars is strictly imperialist. At times it is, but they don't have the same... It doesn't feel quite the same as a true empire of what we're talking about. But
Earth is definitely trying to maintain its control over the built colonies, at least at the beginning, to the extent that it will withhold air and water from a rebelling space station.
Yeah, that extortion doesn't look good for them.
No,
So
extortion does not look good.
That, basically a colony, a space station that is not independent, serves the same function as a colony set up by Earth.
That is actually a good way of looking at that. You're not wrong. That does have a very similar function. It becomes entirely dependent upon and thus subject to the whims of the people who supply it, basically. Yeah.
Right.
And obviously, elements of the belt within the Expanse are pawns in fights between Mars and Earth. Who's going to control this resource or that resource? Who is going to control this? It creates a huge problem throughout the series. It's very well written in that respect. It also gets back to this thing that I think is really important in a lot of these conversations, which is, nobody is really immune to these kinds of governmental structures, that you can go into them for entirely good reasons. You can go into them for entirely bad reasons. And either way, you end up at the same place. Like the Expanse is an example. Xenoworld Saga does the same thing. We see this in a lot of stories where people have been harmed by imperial systems, create empires of their own under the guise that this is necessary and just. And I think it kind of gets to a problem we see in our own world, which is like violence begetting more violence, where people are just continuously hurting each other.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's very difficult to deal with. How do you actually reconcile generations of oppression when that group suddenly has the power to protect itself and inflict harm in return? How do you stop that now? Is it just mad, mutually assured destruction? Is that what we just get to? Because that to me sounds horrifying.
No. Having grown up under MAD longer than you have, Shaun, that MAD is a terrible system of trying to balance powers against each other, because it's just like, well, are we going to get nuked? I don't know. I live in New York. Well, I probably will not escape the fireball. And you kind of like the duck and cover. There's no ducking and covering when they're probably going to drop a missile right onto Times Square, and your Staten Island's well within the blast zone. So sorry. So yeah, I mean the whole class of movies of various kinds discussing this. I mean, we're gonna discuss it. I'm gonna mention we kind of got off.
Colossus, the Forbidden Prophet. Go on.
Yes, Colossus, the Forbidden Prophet kind of like goes for this. It's like, well, what happens when you try to come up with a better system than MAD, but you turn it over to AIs who decide to basically apply Asimov's zeroth law to
that is the other thing that I was trying to think of before. It's Ada Hoffman's books that start with The Outside.
Oh, yes. That's a theocratic empire, yes.
You have a sort of theocratic empire, except the gods are actually AIs that took over humanity a long time ago and enforce their will in a religious ways with servants that they call angels and other things. It turns out, I haven't seen this from within that trilogy, but I've read some short stories now in her Resurrections short story collection, where you get the perspective of some aliens who are kind of, there are some alien polities on the fringes of this AI theocracy, and they're terrified of these crazy this crazy human area that bows to these AI guides and sometimes try to help humans get away from their horrible AI theocrat masters.
Interesting.
It's very.
Have
very
you not read it, sir? I've never not read it, Shaun.
Paul, the number of books that you've read in the last 5 minutes that I will probably never get to read in my lifetime could fill a library.
This feels like the joke we had back in the days of the FS Signal podcast, where we would joke, "Oh, Ken Liu's written another short story." Whoop. every episode we would make that joke because he used to pump them out like mad.
That's true. For a while, he was pumping them out. Yeah.
Before he went to Doorstoppers, and now it does other things like. I started reading an arc of Jump Knots, which is a Chinese novel translated by Ken Liu.
Yeah, I've heard good things about that one.
So I've only started it. So I had other things at work today that didn't let me read it, really. I've had
I'm
a
so
very busy
sorry,
time at
you
work.
poor bastard. You weren't allowed to read at work.
I do feel bad when I only get my reading time at work. I get cranky, Sean. Not cranky enough to
You can read so much. You're getting paid to read books.
It's on my lunch break, Sean. It's on my lunch break.
Which is 6 hours long, isn't it, Paul?
No, Sean. I give my all when I'm giving my all. Anyway. So Ken Liu's been doing all sorts of fun things, and anyway, going back to the original point, yes, I do read a lot, but
yeah, we're starting a book club. It's fine.
Even I can't keep up with everything going on in science fiction and fantasy. I just do my best.
Yeah. We are rich in opportunities for science fiction reading.
There's one last comment in chat, and then I think we got to close out, which is, again, from Steven. The Locked Tomb series is, of course, also about a simultaneously temporal and theocratic empire.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Yes. That would be Tamsin Muir starting with Gideon the Ninth, for those who don't know. Particularly, yes. That is a theocratic temporal empire with very strange shifts in perspective and characters between the three novels, which kind of puts off a lot of people, I noticed. I have discussions with people that just can't stand it. How things shift so much between book 1, book 2, and then book 3, because they're very different beasts doing very different things, which is wildly ambitious on Muir's part. But it's not for everybody. The first one is kind of we're rattling around this cathedral in space, and the second one has body changing and stuff, and the third one has somebody with memory problems and not wondering if she's have to give herself back. It's very interesting that they all do different things in this theocratic star flying empire, which is kind of brings in. The last time we talked Clax, it kind of brings in lots of notes of space fantasy, which, is my jam. So that's why I decided to, have fallen pretty well for these books. I'm not kind of the person who's reread it several times like I know some people have, because there's just too many other books to read.
Yeah. Okay, we got to stop.
We do. Yeah, we probably should stop at some point.
Okay, so before we close the show out, I do want to make a quick announcement. Locust Mag recently approached us about this. And so I do want to note that Locust Magazine will be running an Indiegogo campaign that won't start for, I think, 7 more days after this recording. It's March 1st, so if it's the 8th, I believe, is, I think, when it opens. I checked the page, I'm not sure. But regardless, if you look on Indiegogo, or you look at the show notes for this, or if you're live with us right now, the link has gone into chat. You can sign up now if you're listening before it is open, so that you can get an update, or you can support a great magazine to make sure that they can continue to be awesome and wonderful and amazing. Because Locust Mag has been very kind to us in sending us information requests every year for their annual, what are the fan casts up to, and why you should listen to their shows thing. So. And Locust Mag people are really good, and they do wonderful stuff. They do reviews, all of that good thing. So please support them. Get yourself a subscription. And if you don't, I will cry.
I concur. I kickstarted my reading of science fiction really by starting to read Locust in the mid-90s and start reading, especially the issues revolving around who's nominated for the Hugos and Nebulas, and started okay, these are the books I should be interested in and learn more about, and reading all the articles and the interviews from then till now, and getting a sense of the pulse of science fiction. I don't think my picture's actually ever shown up in Locust, but secretly I would like that to happen one day. I know one way it could
gets
happen.
On top of it.
I can know one way it happened for sure, but I don't speak that aloud. That wish. Because I might be ineligible.
That can't happen now. You're ineligible.
Exactly.
Yeah, you are mysteriously ineligible for all time.
Thank you,
what'll
Dave
happen?
Picardi.
1 year you won't even get a nomination, and you'll just show up on the ballot for no reason. And everyone will be confused, including you. You'll just be it'll be like in 50 years when you're not even trying to be part of this, they'll just be like, yeah, put Paul Weimer on there. Why not?
Oh, God.
Yeah.
That'd be hilarious.
They'll just call it the mysterious Weimer vote, and then you'll describe it in your Weimwires.
Yep. Yeah, and then get another chapter of the Weimars.
Another chapter of the Weimars, the mysterious Hugo nominations. The corruption goes deep, as it were. All right, folks. So thank you, everybody, for coming out to the live show, and thank you for listening if you're listening. If you would like to suggest topics for us to do for discussions, or even let us know current events that you'd like to cover on stuff like Clacks or whatever, you can do so by going to skiffyfanny.com/listener suggestions, or email us at skiffyfanny@gmail.com, and that'll do the wonderful thing of helping us out with topics, because I can't come up with them all. So help us out. We are Skiffy Fanny on all the social medias, especially Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, eventually TikTok, and elsewhere. We have a Patreon as well. And all those links you can find at Linktree, which is linktr.ee/SkiffyandFanty. If you like what the show does, please give us reviews on iTunes and all of those places, Podchaser, GoodpodsHQ, please. And tell people about this show, for the love of God.
We like to have more audiences. We're going to be here just about every Friday at 6:30 on Alphabet Stream. So tell your friends, show up. As you can see, we respond to your questions live. And you
at 7:30 Eastern.
7:30
Yes,
Eastern. Thank you.
7:30
6:30 Central. Thank you, Trish.
Or 5:30 Pacific, depending on where you are. I don't know what that time is in Hawaii, but it's, anyway, point is, come to the show. I'm at lots of places, ShaunDuke.net. Obviously, I am on here, Alphabet Streams, Tuesday and Thursday at 7 p.m. Central. I am also on Patreon and on various socials, and my link tree is just /ShaunDuke.
And you can find me, Trish, on Blue Sky at PE Matson, on Mastodon, newsy.social at TrishEM, and on my blog at whatsthewordnow.blogspot.com.
And you can find me eligibly across the internet as Prince Justin, PRINCEJBSTIN, doing book reviews, podcasting, streaming with Shaun, sharing photography, modding Twitch channels. I do lots of things. Throw a rock on the internet, you will find me. Guaranteed.
All right, I got to make it awkward because it's required in the Skiffy Fanny bylaws. And so, as is required in the Skiffy Fanny bylaws, I will just say that I am starting the Interstellar Shaun Empire right now. Our mascot will be a giant cheese fountain into which you will dip little bits of gluten-free or otherwise bread of your choice.
But what kind of cheese, Shaun? This is important. Is it like the mixture of like Velveeta that's very velvety, not great cheese, but
Paul,
it flows very well?
I'm about to blow your mind. Okay. Our cheese fountain will have the ability to micro-adjust the cheese to your particular utopian specifications. This is how it will pacify the populace, by making sure that everybody gets the exact kind of cheese they want, including lactose intolerant and vegan cheese eaters. They will get that too.
That's quite the construction.
How do you think I'm going to have an empire that lasts for 10 trillion years?
True, until people get sick of cheese at last.
They won't get sick of cheese, because when they get sick of cheese, it changes to something else they want.
Ah.
See, I'm smart. I've basically made a cheese fountain into a replicator.
Well done, Shaun. Well done.
And on that note, awkward ending and scene.
Well, take care of yourselves and of each other.
Stay frosty.